I'd like to call this October 6th special meeting of the Zion City Council to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Here.
Commissioner Holmes?
Here.
Commissioner Frierson?
Here.
Commissioner McDowell?
Here.
Mayor McKinney?
Here. Item number 3, are there any agenda changes by any of the commissioners? Is there a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Item number...
Huh?
Roll call. Yeah. Clerk, call the roll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Holmes?
Aye.
Commissioner Frierson?
Aye.
Commissioner McDowell?
Aye.
Mayor McKinney?
Aye. Item number 4, citizens' comments. All right. No citizens' comments. Item number 5, discussion authorization approval. 5A, discussion regarding finances and budget per Administrator Nabel.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is the second of our meetings. The intent is to try and address our revenue issues and also our just overall budgetary issues. We have a significant budget deficit that we're faced with this year and going forward. The goal of this is to try and address ideas, try and brainstorm those ideas and get those implemented, because any ideas that we do come up with and we decide to implement is going to take quite a bit of time at this point and have some big impacts on services, staff, the budget overall. And usually there's a lag for that kind of stuff, so we don't want to be having this discussion May 1st at the start of our fiscal year when it's already too late to start implementing that to get any savings. So what I did last time is I went over the status of some of the big revenue items that we had in the fire, so to speak. I wanted to take this time to provide updates on that. But what I did first was I changed the order around a little bit, and I actually have the Cannabis Cultivation Center license as the first item on here because you've been hearing me give updates on that, but I was able to contact Medtronics and have Keith Malone here, the president of Medtronics, to provide a direct update on where they're at, because I figure they'll have more details and be able to provide more information than I can. So if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to them at this point.
All right.
Good evening. I'm Keith Malone. I'm the president of Medtronics. As you know, we have appealed our court case to the Illinois Supreme Court. We expect to hear it sometime after the election. According to all the constitution scholars and that we've addressed, going by case law, we have an excellent chance of overturning the appellate court's decision. So that's where our thing is. You all have a handout with the revenue projections based on what's currently being the current in operation facilities now, and what their revenues are generating. Our estimates that the Zion's revenue from our facility, if it was operational, it would have covered your shortfall that you currently have. It would have been recovered that by now. The main thing that we need is attention to our plight. There seems to be in Springfield, there seems to be Chicago and Southern Illinois, and this area doesn't seem to be on the radar in Springfield. I spent a lot of time down there with lobbyists and knocking on doors of the politicians down there, and they just kind of seem to be oblivious of this area. They have two agendas. They have the Chicago agenda and the Southern Illinois agenda. We have to do something to get our area on the radar maps down there.
If I can interject real quick, I'll tell a quick story that relates to that. When I first started here, I went to some Illinois Department of Revenue seminars about taxes, and I went to another one, a managers conference, and they had presenters from the state. All of their slides and all the terminology they used was Chicago and downstate. Illinois doesn't stop on the northern border at Chicago, but that's consistently seems to be how we're treated. We get forgotten up here, to Keith's point, and they don't seem to hear our urgency. We don't seem to get a fair shake sometimes of consideration. So that's why we're really trying to push this program for social equity municipalities, cities, areas. Medtronics came here not only just because they like the location, but we meet the criteria. That's what this program was designed to do, and we and they are being overlooked again, and the program is not serving the area that it was intended to, based on how it was written. So this has been 6 years, 5 years.
Yes.
that we've been trying to fight. Well, they've taken on the fight. We've been trying to support them in that. As the handout says, we hope to have a Supreme Court ruling by the end of this year. I believe the final briefs are due to the Supreme Court, is it October 16th?
Correct.
12th?
Yes.
Oh, 10th? Okay. So after, Medtronics got their briefs in, but the state continued to extend that deadline. I believe that this is the final deadline,
Correct.
and we should have a ruling shortly thereafter. But this is a 5 or 6 year process that they've been fighting, and we've been trying to fight with them, meaning the world to Zion. As Keith said, that addresses the majority of our deficit, just with the revenue share, not even counting the 2% to the community trust donation that they agreed to as part of the contract. So we're going to continue pushing that. We're going to try and get, if you have any opportunities in any networks you have with legislators, with media outlets, anything like that, please share the story of this. We're going to be putting out a press release as it relates to this from the city as well, explaining the situation and what we feel the oversight is of us being overlooked on this.
My question, Mr. Malone, when you talk about what other things can we continue to do? Because I've gone to Springfield a couple of times. In fact, I want to say, was it September?
It was, sir.
September, we went down, and the idea that we came up, I was talking to Dave Nabel one day. I said, we should just go down and petition for another license. And so we drove down to Springfield, set up a couple of meetings. We met with Toy Hutchinson, and we presented that idea with Senator Bush there as well, and we've been continuing to kind of work behind the scenes in our way to be able to assist you as you go through your court case.
Well, Senator Bush has been one of our greatest advocates. She's a great advocate for Zion. I sit on a lot of different meetings with her on other items, and she's always bringing up the financial situations here in Zion. So she really is in you guys' corner. There are a lot of things, meetings that I attend down there, and she's always advocating for Zion and expressing her concern. I actually sit in a meeting with the governor, and she brought up those concerns with that. So she's very advantageous in getting the Zion message out to her peers and anyone else who will listen to her. She does an excellent job, in my opinion.
Yeah, I concur. I agree with you.
I have a question. So, should you have a favorable ruling from the Supreme Court, do you have any estimate as to when revenue might start coming?
I've got a commitment from the Department of Agriculture, the governor, that once the ruling will be made in our favor, that they will fast track our license. There is a motion for our board to try to advance some revenue to the city of Zion once we're awarded the thing. It has not been approved by our board, but that is a discussion that we've had at our board meetings, that we would advance some. We know what your situation is, and the mayor and David have been a great big advocate to us and stuff, and so we're trying to get our board to sign off on us advancing some of your revenue in advance to help you as much as we can.
Thanks.
Mr. Miller, once you get the license and you get the go-ahead, how long will it take you to project to build the facility and to ramp up your production? Do you have,
Well,
like, a
that would
timeline?
depend on what time of the year it goes into. But our team, we just had our consultants, the builders, we just met with them. They flew over from Holland to meet with us, so we're ready to go. If they give us the go-ahead on Monday, we'll have heavy equipment leveling that area. I mean, we've already contracted with, and we'll have, we're ready to go. We're concerned with the temperature and with the building, the foundation. We can do the erection of the building is a glass house. It's, but the foundation is one of concrete and with the dirt floor. But so we need good weather for the concrete. But we'll be able to build during the winter if we can get that foundation in. We've already met with our consultant. We flew them in from Holland and met with them last week to just discuss that and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from commissioners?
If there's anything I can do, if there's any conversations you guys want to have, both David and the mayor have my contact information. I'm willing to meet with you guys and try anything that you think. Like I said, I spend a great deal of time in Springfield. I'm meeting tomorrow with some state officials on this matter. And so anything that you guys need from me or anything anyone, I'm open and available.
Okay.
All right.
All right,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome to stay and hear the rest of our sob story, but I wouldn't expect it. So, thank you for coming. The next item is related but unrelated. Update on the cannabis dispensary license status. The state is still trying to finalize, bouncing around, jumping through hoops on how they're actually going to award these. They anticipate 75 of the licenses to be awarded this fall, and I believe another 110 not too far after that. But I believe it's a lottery process. Now they're talking about individuals or applicants that met the original score or didn't meet the original scoring requirements, but met the social equity components and other criteria, that they would report back to them what was wrong with their application and potentially actually give them an opportunity to resubmit to address those issues. But they're still hashing that out. So they're talking licenses in fall, and we'll just go from there at this point because that's all the information we have. But again, there'd be a lag time on them getting up and running and those taxes coming through. If there was a dispensary in Zion, I anticipate somewhere between $150,000 to $200,000 a year of revenue from the tax on that, based on performance of other dispensaries. So that would could address a chunk of this going forward. The Stranded Act, don't anticipate anything before the election at this point. We tried to get it attached to the Alaska Energy Bill. It did not. It was introduced in the Science Committee on the House, never got out of the committee to get attached to the bill. At this point now, nothing's really happening, and everyone's just kind of waiting for the results of the election, at which point we'll reconvene based on the results and re-strategize on how to proceed. So no real action on that. The CARES Act funding, that's the first COVID relief bill that came out. That's the one that the county got $121 million on, and they're allocating out to municipalities. They initially allocated $20 million, of which ours was about $750,000. Our share of that was about $750,000. There was a process to submit for that. It was a pretty complicated process. During that process, however, the Treasury amended their guidance on what constitutes eligible COVID-related expenses to basically lift the requirement and made all police and fire, all public health and safety salaries and benefits deemed substantially related to COVID. So it became 100% eligible expenses, which just opened the doors wide for that. So everyone had to withdraw their submission that they already put together to the county and then resubmit and recreate all the documentation under the new regulations. That was submitted last week. They said it would take about 2 weeks to process and actually do disbursements. So I'm hoping to hear something on that within the next couple of weeks, but that could be $750,000 that we did not have in the budget. I am hopeful that it's actually going to be more because the initial allocation from the county was $20 million. Since then, on their website, it says they've allocated $35 million, and I checked it today, and it's actually $42 million. So in the last meeting, I talked about them kind of slowly opening the spigot to see what was eligible and what qualified, and then if they saw that there was a lot of need in a lot of those expenses, they would allocate more. Since the guidance changed and it became much easier to qualify for those funds, I think they opened the spigot more. However, I don't know that that additional $22 million is reallocating among the municipalities. I don't know that we're going to get more. It may have been that more municipalities were just added to the eligibility list, or just additional organizations or fire protection districts were added. I talked to Mandy Flora today, who's with the Lake County Municipal League, I believe.
Yeah.
She's been great providing all this information. She was in contact with Max Myers at the county. He's working on the updated allocation spreadsheet, and we'll be getting that to us shortly. On a conference call that I had with the county, the head of, that's the individual that's managing this, I can't remember his last name, but Greg something, said not to be surprised if our reimbursement was more than was originally allocated, but he didn't commit to any sort of number. So as soon as I get any information or feedback on that, I'll forward it on to the council as well. HEROES Act funding.
David?
Oh, yeah.
So, did you say 100% of salaries for police and fire?
And benefits.
And benefits.
Correct.
Okay. From when?
From March 1st through March 1st of this year through December of this year.
All right. Well, that's huge.
So I submitted through the end of September, and we had about 5.6 million of eligible expenses, including the other expenses, tax anticipation warrant costs, all that stuff. And there's still 3 months left to go in a year for eligibility. So yeah, that's huge. I submitted. They said submit whatever's eligible. I submitted everything, and our reimbursement will be much less than that. But if we get funding for HEROES Act, I'm guessing it's going to follow the same guidance, so I'll already have that created. The way the HEROES Act is written, there's potential for 5.6 million to the city of Zion, but that also includes provisions for revenue reductions due to COVID, whereas this is just expense related. But that's being fought in the Senate side of things. They're still negotiating on.
David, I don't know if you heard the news this afternoon. The president has unilaterally stopped all negotiations on COVID stimulus.
On the HEROES Act?
On the HEROES Act.
Okay.
That may change tomorrow. It may change before the end of the day.
I believe originally it was a $3.3 trillion stimulus act, and then I think the House resubmitted a 2.2, somewhere around that.
Right.
Which passed in the House. But again, I don't anticipate it's going to go anywhere in the Senate because they've been very no further stimulus.
Yeah.
If anything was to go through, I would expect it's going to be unemployment and rental assistance type and food assistance type stuff, and they're going to strike everything else. But that's another one of those that I think is politics is being played, and we probably shouldn't expect anything before the election.
Well, it was made clear, apparently the president said, not until after the election.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's not too long.
away. Not too far away.
Well, we still have to deal with the fallout afterwards, however the chips fall. So, so there was a memo I included here on the HEROES Act, item 4 in your packet, which is probably you can just throw in the shredder at this point because it's not relevant. But that was what the House included in the HEROES Act provision.
Was it included in the information for this meeting?
No, it's
Yeah, it's on that separate packet I gave you.
behind that.
Oh,
Yeah, item, my crudely drawn page numbers at the bottom, it's number 4,
okay, got it.
but that is not going to be relevant anymore. The last thing is the census results. I included as item number 5, our response rate is 64.2%, which is actually the exact same percentage as we had in 2010. Trailing behind the state, trailing behind surrounding communities significantly, however. People that do not respond do not get counted. Our 64.2% is our population for the next 10 years, and that drives all our per capita numbers. Now, the original deadline for the census was the end of October. That was shortened to the end of September. Subsequently, a few days ago, that shortening was overturned, and now it is still the end of October. So it's still not too late to get your census information in. It has been extended to the end of the month. So every bit counts. A lot of per capita revenue, a lot of grant revenue. CDBG formulas are based on population. So we're still fighting that fight to try and get the word out and get that number up. Plus side is at least we're not behind where we were in 2010, which we were about 4%. As of last meeting, we were about 4% behind where we were in 2010. So I was getting a little nervous. But there's still room for improvement. Any questions on those items before I go forward? The meat of this meeting. So I did a projection based on where we're at and what I anticipate we would be at as of the end of April of 21, the end of our fiscal year. Initially, the budget we approved had us borrowing $1.8 million to fill the budget deficit. That was kind of the plug figure if we didn't get some sort of relief. I wanted to see how we were tracking with that. We're actually right on target. We've had some revenues up and down, some expenses up and down, but we're still right on track for that $1.8 million. The purpose of this series of meetings, like I said, was to start talking about ideas. We've pitched a lot of ideas over the last 5 to 10 years to address our budget. All the low-hanging fruit is gone. All the things we could tolerate implementing, we have to address our situation. So now we're left with the ideas we don't really want to tolerate. But I wanted to put together a list of these ideas so we could at least put them on the table, discuss them, the pros and cons, try and identify which ones we'd like to pursue looking into more. None of these ideas are anything that we're saying we're going to implement. This is just for discussion purposes to see if it's something we could even consider. So I'm just going to put on a list here, and you can feel free to stop me on any one. The first one is pension obligation bonds. This is a mechanism, not a good one, but like I said, none of these are good ideas. But you can issue bonds basically to get the cash now to put into your pension funds with the hopes that they outperform what you're paying on the bonds. So we have, let's say, $40 million of, between police and fire, unfunded pension obligation. If we took out bonds for $20 million, we could put those into the pension funds. The actuary then says, hey, you're going to earn 6% on those for the next 20 years. So now those pension funds are more fully funded. The amount you have to levy for pension funds might go from $3 million to $1.5 million. the hope is that that $1.5 million is less. You're getting better bang for your buck on the levy, the pension levy reduction than what those bonds cost annually. So let's say over that time period, our debt service is $1 million a year. We levy that $1 million a year for the debt service, but we're able to reduce the pension levy by 1.5, getting us in net savings. That frees up, and then if we keep our levy basically the same, that frees up $500,000 for general fund operations. So it's not a great solution. There are pros and cons to that, but it is a mechanism that's out there. If it's something we want to consider, we want to look at, there's actuarial calculations that have to be done saying here, this is what the impact would be on the levy. This is what the debt service, what you'd have to put aside now. This is what the debt service would be on those bonds. And you basically have to go out to market to sell those bonds as well, which is a challenge in itself because municipalities that are going this route are generally in financial trouble, which is not real appealing.
Would it be in the same category as a municipal bond? The pension?
Yeah,
obligation?
yeah. I mean, it's secured by a taxing authority, so you would go on a municipal bond market, basically. So that's an option. If you want to pursue that, like I said, I'd have to get the actuaries involved. There's going to be a cost with them doing that study, reperforming an actuarial calculation of what we would need to present value finance and what the impact on our levy would be. Somewhat related is that the Illinois Municipal League, I believe, is trying to push to have police and fire pension funds re-amortized. Basically, the police and fire pension funds, you have to be fully funded. The way the calculations work, you have to be funded by 2040. They're trying to get the state to change that to 2050. Basically, if you think about it, it's like if you go from a 15-year mortgage on your house to a 30-year mortgage on your house. You're going to pay more in the long term on interest, but your monthly payment for that goes down. So you're freeing up that obligation now. I don't know that that's going to go anywhere. Police and fire pensions have very strong lobbies down there, and they want to see their pension funds funded now and make sure they have their retirement.
And I think they were at the pension conference last week, they were talking about extending it even further again.
Beyond 2050? Okay. Well, I don't know what the likelihood of that is, but that would somewhat have the same effect. Our required annual levy for police and fire pension would go down, which would free up cap in our levy to general fund purposes. So I don't know. Do you know if they said any sort of timeline on that?
Yeah, I can see if I have it in the notes.
Okay.
I don't remember.
So that's one thing in the works that I just put on here because it's kind of related. One thing that could help our deficit, and I have an email into Amalgamated Bank just to confirm because I don't want to say for sure, but we do have 2 bonds that their last payments are scheduled for next fiscal year, ending April 22. So May 1st, 21 through April 22. However, we have to escrow those funds December of this year. So essentially, we're going to pay those final payments for next fiscal year this year, which means they fall off. For book purposes, it's an expense next year, but for cash flow purposes, that money's already set aside. So we don't have to come up with that. So we wouldn't have to, right now in the general fund, we show a transfer to the debt service fund of about $1 million for principal and interest. If these both are paid this year, which I'm looking at, that could drop down to about $300,000. So we wouldn't have to transfer $1 million to debt service, which is part of the expenses in the general fund budget. We'd only have to transfer $300,000. That's a huge chunk off of that deficit. But I want to confirm that for sure with them before we rely on that. Somewhat related to that, I try to put these in some sort of logical order. I have paying for debt service of $3.7 million bonds from the new TIF, which is approximately $300,000 a year. Of that million that we transfer, like I said, 300,000 of those, or 700,000 of those 2 bond issues. The other 300,000 are bonds that we issued for the purchase of the ball field to get us control of that and out from under the property tax obligation that we had at the time. That was done with general fund dollars. However, now we have a TIF that encompasses that property's boundaries, the intent being to develop that. And we do have, part of the TIF budget is property acquisition and related financing costs. We could allocate 300,000 of debt service. We could allocate those costs to the TIF and shift that obligation now from the general fund to the TIF fund for economic development and redevelopment of that property. So again, if both of these come into play, that actually shifts $1 million of a transfer to debt service off of the general fund's books, which is more than half of our deficit. But that's more of a, I have to confirm it with legal, also our TIF consultants.
It's fine.
Okay. Confirmed with legal.
100% legitimate.
Yeah, and we did look at the TIF budget, and that was a cost of acquisition, so, or we do have it in the budget that was approved as part of the TIF. So if that's something that we would want to do to address this, we just need kind of a green light from council on that. This 5th item here is going to probably be the one that's going to generate the most discussion, and I want to say that we don't have a lot of details on this yet. It's just an idea. All the questions that are probably going to come from this are questions that would be asked if we decided to pursue looking into it. And that would be privatizing the water and sewer utility. There are municipalities across the country and some in Illinois that have actually sold their water utilities. Those water utilities are then regulated as a private utility, just like gas and electric, by the Illinois Utility Commission or
Commerce.
ICC. Yeah. Thank you. So they have to follow certain rules and everything like that. But the big issue we have is with our water utility is that there's probably $30 to $40 million of very aged pipe in the ground that we don't really have a good plan to address. So there's 2 things I'd like to do here before we would even consider this. The 3 concerns I have with privatizing are the impact on rates to the residents, the level of service that we would continue to have within the community, and the jobs of the employees that are currently in that department. But then beyond that, it would be what we would do with the funds that we obtain from the sale of the water utility to ensure that those are invested properly to, whether it's payoff of debts, whether it's current funding of pensions, payoff of bonds to free up debt service costs, whatever those things are, to make sure we have a reset button, to make sure we have cash reserves, and to make sure we don't get in this situation in the future. That's going to be key on this. Before we do any of that discussion, though, what I would like to do is bring back to council a proposal for an independent water rate study. I think what we need to do is look at, if we don't sell, if we continue maintaining it, we have to address our infrastructure somehow. The worst thing we could have is we had our first citywide boil order in probably a decade when we had a lot of main breaks all at once. The number of breaks are going up every year because we have aged infrastructure. We've had manhole basins, I don't know the right language, but the big one that we had sink and the bottom fall, that was $150,000 repair. We probably have more of that around there, more of that out there that we just don't know about until it happens. But I don't want to have our system potentially collapse or degrade to a point where we have public health emergency or lack of water utility. So what I'd like to do is have an independent water rate study done saying, based on city cost of operations based on age of infrastructure and what we need to put into it. This is what your water and sewer rate should be. And then say, that's what we're going to have to go to address this. Then, if we're looking at what the impact of selling water utility and privatizing is, we're comparing apples to apples. Because our water rate is reduced because it's less probably by 50% than a lot of other municipalities because we haven't built in that infrastructure cost. We've been kicking that can down the road. So we need to correct that first, and then we can see the true impact of what a privatization would be. There are companies interested in this. We would have to go out for proposal on it. And we would have to make sure we address our due diligence on this with, again, what are we going to negotiate as part of that? If we decide to move forward, will they negotiate with that? We would have to contact other municipalities that have done this, have a list of questions for them. It's probably a year-long process from when you decide to kind of look into this to when you can actually close on a deal if you decide to go forward. But there's a lot of impact here. This is a drastic situation, but it does give us a good amount of cash flow up front that is unrestricted, that we could invest, kind of hit the reset button and clean up our budget with. And it does get that infrastructure liability off of our books, off of our shoulders for the pipe that's in that ground.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have some kind of an informal review of the sale of our water service. And they came back with an estimated rate, and nothing's set in stone, or it's not really an offer. It just kind of gave us a ballpark. But if this is something that we're going to ask companies to bid on, or, I mean, just to get an idea of what it would be, they would then do that rate study. Because they'd have to come back with what water rate they would charge our residents. Is that something that we could rely on and not have to pay for a third party, or what do you think about that?
We could, but it's like buying a car and having the dealer say, what do you think it's worth? They're going to be biased in that, because what they do is they go to the ICC and they say, based on the entire system, here's our starting rate. And then they can go up or down a certain percent every year. They have to justify that, and there's caps on that, but it's based on that initial rate. So if they want to say it's $50 per thousand to start, and they can go up 5% next year, well, that's 5% of 50,000 versus 5% of 15 per thousand. So they're going to be biased. That's kind of why I wanted to do an independent one, because we would probably be biased too as to what we say it is. So if we're going to basically go to the public and say, this is what we're going to raise the rate to address our infrastructure, I don't want it to say, well, the city's going to do this and use the money, or the private company's saying this, so that they're saying, I don't want them to inflate it to their benefit. I don't want them to say, well, if you kept it, you'd have to go to $20 per thousand, but if you sell it to us, we'll do 15. That's going to skew your decision.
Yeah, okay.
So I want to make sure to try and keep it as independent as possible, and to take any biases out of it.
David, how long does it take? Excuse me. How long does it take for rate study to be completed?
Probably 60 to 90 days.
And the cost of it?
I don't know. I would say somewhere in probably the 15 to 20,000 range.
Okay.
I got some preliminary. We had Alex Grantellis from Fifth Third, who's our bond counsel, actually kind of phone poll a few places just to get a rough estimate. But we'd have to put together an actual scope of work and get quotes on it. It could be 45 days, but it might be up to 90.
Okay.
But David, even after the rate study, if we decided to do privatization, we would have to go out we'd probably have to do a bid process or a request for
I would
proposals.
expect so.
Request for
Yeah.
proposals.
Yeah.
That's going to take time, and then if we did make that move, which is, it is a big move, and it's one that likely, I mean, once you do it, you can't go back.
Right.
Well,
It's going to take some time
Well,
to put something like that in place anyway.
They're typically with these deals, there are buyback provisions associated with it. It's like a 5-year window. That's great if everything hits the fan, but typically the way those are written is what they paid for it plus whatever they put into the system minus some depreciation. Well, our system is so aged and leaking water everywhere, which we know. They're gonna put probably $20-30 million of infrastructure in right off the bat. So now if we sold it for $20 million and then they put 20 in, our buyback just became $40 million to take back because we would be getting the benefit of all that new infrastructure at that point. So where we would get that, I don't know, but there is a buyback provision in there for that. But I wouldn't want to go into this relying at all on that as part of our decision process. That's the ripcord if it really goes south. But
We would have to assume that if we made this move, it would be a permanent
Correct.
move.
correct.
Some of the research I've done on a couple of companies here in Illinois that have done this, the least amount of increase per rate has been right around 55%. Bolingbrook, I believe, went up 75% for their customers. After 4 years, Bolingbrook Council tried to take a look at buying it back, but there was no choice for them because of the expense. Some of your smaller municipalities has done good. It's worked very well. We're mid-range, and your larger ones, there's been a lot of problems. It's all what you're willing to actually take on.
Can you expound on what you mean by problems?
Rate increases, customer care, brake repair, response times. If you remember, just a couple months ago, we just went through 14 main breaks we repaired in a single day. That would probably take them a week. So you would have customers without water for 2 to 3 days. That's scenario.
That's the customer service prong of it that I was concerned with. Now, there's two pieces on that rate increase. One again is that municipalities probably keep their rates artificially low because it's we increased our rate a good amount to address some of the infrastructure, but that's a drop in the bucket. A company's going to come in and go, this is what it needs to be at. And their goal is to make a profit. They're regulated in what profit they can have. But let's say that profit is 7%, then theoretically, their rate's just going to be 7% higher than what the city should be. But because ours is so low, because it doesn't have those infrastructure components built in, that's why I want to get the rate study to say this is what it should be at, because you might look at the rate and say our water rate would double if we privatized, but it might only be 30% higher than what it should be at. So we have that's the apples to apples I was talking about. If we're gonna look at this objectively, we have to say this is where we should be, and then look at where it would be privatized. It may come back that because of our infrastructure, the rate we would have to go higher than what it would be privatized. But I don't know that until we go through the process. So, but I think that would give us a starting point to a springboard on this. But then also we need to address all those other pieces, the response times, the current employee situation, looking at the rate impact. put together those questions and concerns that we could start digging into and addressing. My plan would be to call all municipalities that have done this, talk with their mayor and administrators or managers, have some of those questions. Basically, what do you wish you had known? Would you do it again? And then what hurdles did you have? And obviously, where they're at in the process is going to change what credibility I give to that. If somebody just did this 6 months ago, they're still going to be working through a lot of the hiccups and headaches. And if they go, oh, no, I'd never do this again, well, that's growing pains, but we'll take that into consideration. If somebody that did this 10 years ago says I'd never do it again, that's a different story. So we would need to find that out as part of the due diligence process, but we'd have to find that out all up front, and then based on the proposal, we'd also have to agree with a plan of what to do with those proceeds. We cannot get into a situation where we add to the budget. We would have to, at a minimum, live as is and allow ourselves time to dig out of that hole, invest the funds, get some interest to help supplement, which we haven't had in a long time. Like I said, pay off bonds, pay off pension obligations, and try and get the budget up right. So I have talked with all the Public Works employees about this. We have had meetings with them. I invited them to the meeting tonight, but we're also recording it. They can watch it there. I want to make sure they stay very involved in the process, as well as Director Roberts. Because I told them, I said, any company that's going to come by is going to sell us on the idea that we should sell. I want the people who know the operations to poke holes in that. But I'm going to flip that around as well, because obviously each side has vested interest, and the reality is somewhere in the middle. So are we okay with me getting a proposal put together for a rate study, an independent rate study as a first step of this, or is this not?
I think that would be a good move, yeah.
Okay. And I can bring it back for discussion as an actual agenda item.
Do we have the expertise on staff now to do a rate study?
I don't think we do. And again, trying to keep that independence and that bias out of it. I want to have a deliverable that we can go to the public with and go, this is what the rate should be, and not have it be questioned. But there's a lot more to it as far as the cost per aging infrastructure and all that stuff. Then we could put together estimates, but that's not. I don't think that's going to be solid enough for a decision of this magnitude. I understand. I don't want to spend the money either, but
throwing things out, trying to save money.
yeah. Okay, I'll put that together and bring it back. The next item I have on here is under the privatized water and sewer utility was to increase the water sewer rate to properly maintain our infrastructure. We talked about that. That's what the rate study before for us to make that determination. Another option, not a good one for various reasons, but is to privatize ambulance services, where we keep fire and accident calls internally, but it has potential financial savings, but there's a lot of other downsides with it. But if it's something that we want to consider and investigate, we can do that. I know Antioch did it probably 7 or 8 years ago.
No, Antioch is run by Antioch Fire. Antioch Rescue is run by Antioch Fire.
Now they're?
Yeah, they have been. They just
I thought they
combined-
went and then they bounced back.
No, Rescue just went to a combined fire rescue.
Oh,
Same
okay,
as like-
okay, gotcha. So I mean, when I look at this, there's a lot of regret for places that go this route. There's also some. We'd probably be against some contractual issues, not only union, but with any private ambulance service as far as where and how they would respond. But if it's something that we want to look at, we could put together, I could sit down with the fire department and look at pros, cons, and put those together. Like I said, any of these are going to involve, any of these from here on out are going to involve major changes to the way we operate, the way services are provided to the public, and going to be very painful.
Well, here's the things we have to think about the savings, David, just looking at it while you're talking.
Yeah.
So right now, we're running 6 pieces of equipment with 7 personnel through the use of 2 jump companies. So if you're going to maintain the fire, that means you're going to maintain 3 pieces of equipment, which means you still have to staff it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 personnel.
Correct.
If you're going to run 3 ambulances through a private ambulance company, that's 3 ambulances with 2 personnel each.
Will they do 2 each, or will they require 3 each on ambulances from private companies?
Most privates are doing 2 each.
All right, okay.
So it'll be 2 each. So does that save? Because now the private ambulance technically is the recipient of the ambulance billing,
Correct.
because they're running it under Medicare.
Yeah, so we'd lose
And then you're going to need your
$800,000 to $1
GEMT
million a year of revenue. with this
plus
as
your
well.
GEMT.
Right.
So you're losing ambulance billing plus GEMT revenue, plus paying for 3 ambulances, staffing 6 more people. I mean, so I don't know if the cost for that verifies the cost
Exactly.
for staying 5.
I'm not saying there will be a savings.
No,
It's
no.
going through the due diligence
I'm just saying
of,
that's my first thought
whether
with
there
due
would-
diligence,
right.
which also ties into everybody here is firefighter, paramedic. We all run the same as our neighbors. So now we're not giving apples to apples when Beach Park or the Harbor calls for mutual aid. We don't even know if they're going to get 2 paramedics or they're going to get a paramedic and EMT. You know, so those are the things to consider, not to mention there's a lot of turnover in private ambulances and protocol differences, because today I'm working in this system, tomorrow I'm working in this system. You know, what's your constraints now, because you don't own the ambulance, nor do you own the personnel on that ambulance. So,
oh yeah, this is.
those are all the things that are going in there.
And, I don't know, you probably said, we've said this many times, that none of these are really ideal ideas. They're draconian. I guess I was just a little bit encouraged, David, on the revenue side, with some possible funding from CARES and HEROES, and including salaries for police and fire. I think that's really huge. So I hope we don't have to go down any of these routes. That we'll be able to make up the difference on the income side. Going through this list is just quite painful. And,
Oh, absolutely. But and remember that any CARES Act funding, not to be a wet blanket, but that's my job on this meeting, unfortunately. Any CARES Act just addresses or starts to address some of the shortfall of this year's budget.
Yeah, right.
We still have next year to address without a CARES Act bailout or that funding repeating itself. Unless it buys us time, again, for stranded, for potentially the HEROES Act to come through, if that happens, all those other things. All these ideas are to address the May 1st, the fiscal year starting May 1st. These aren't things we would be talking about implementing right now. They're things that require a lot of due diligence for us to be able to implement. So this is one of those, if you tell me absolutely not, we strike it off, I'm not going to waste any more time on it. If you don't tell me that, then I need to start having the meetings and having the discussions and have us go over the pros, cons, and I'll come back and go, here's the pros, but here's the cons, or this actually costs us $300,000 more if we implement, or
Well, I mean, that's really the difficulty of the list. Just to say yay or nay to anything on this list is difficult to do because we don't actually know the cost savings. If privatizing ambulance will save us $100,000, I might come back and say that's just not worth it. But I don't know that number, so it's hard to say a yay or a nay to it.
well, like I said, this is a first pass through of just what's ideas that are on the table. It will develop it more as we go along. If like I said, if there's something that jumps out at you that says absolutely not, we're not touching that, I appreciate knowing that, so I don't spend time going through the process. But this is everything this is all we've got right now to even talk about. Walmart sales tax incentive, we've talked about that a little bit. That will be dropped. We have currently 16 months left on the remainder of the incentive. Then that drops off. We've repaid it, and we've got $250,000 freed up from the budget that we'll get in sales tax. So that's something that's coming down the road. We've been in negotiations with them for this year, trying to get that ironed out. So we actually haven't paid this year's obligation. We budgeted for it. But if they say, yeah, we'll cut that in half or we'll defer it, then we're actually saving $250,000 this year as well, or $125,000 if they say half. So we're kind of holding that a little bit, honestly, until they get back to us. So it's either going to drop off in a relatively soon fiscal year, or we're going to get some savings in the near term and continue paying in the future on it. Municipal liquidity facility, that's a federal program to basically loan money to municipalities from the federal government to help address COVID-related responses, impacts, etc. It's a low interest, basically like a revolving loan fund. The problem with that is it's still financing. It's just better terms and better length of time than you'd have for a tax anticipation warrant. The problem is it only applies to municipalities over $250,000. Unless you're a designated city by the governor of your state, then you're eligible to qualify. The governor can designate one city as a designated city that doesn't meet the criteria. Currently, Illinois does not have any designated cities. So we would have to get ourselves designated to then be eligible for this, but it's a financing mechanism that is much more preferable than tax anticipation warrants or bond issues.
Is this an option that will be available through the county? To lump the county together?
The county is a separate entity, so it's counties over 500,000 or municipalities over 250. The county would be eligible for financing for the county, but they wouldn't be able to do a pass-through for us. Right. But that's something I'm looking into, but there's going to be political ties and push associated with that to get us designated. But it's something that's out there. Selling all city-owned property or lots, that's something that we've been talking about. The ball field property, the 16 acres there, 16, 18 acres there. But also we're actually going to be having a meeting Tuesday, about the property that's getting donated to us. We're in the process of still doing the due diligence on that. But I'd like to try and contract with a broker to actually get those on the market. We've been holding on to it to direct market to retailers and developers at the shows that Economic Development Coordinator Sean Bronson and myself have gone to. That's all on hold. So if we were looking for a cash influx, we may be able to just outright try and sell the property through a broker. However, I'd like to have a broker that we'd have more to offer. So once we get the due diligence done on the other property, to be able to market that for lease, and also Trumpet Park and the ball field property. We don't own Trumpet Park right now. We just have an option on it. But if we could get right sales prices for that, we could basically flip that for development. Something that we're looking at.
Hey, David, can I say something?
Yeah.
We just recently had bid opening for vacant residential lots we own. We received 3 bids, and the gentleman that bid on the property has some interest in possibly building a couple of homes. So that'd be additional revenue for me. And get something to home built. That would come in the council on the 20th.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to try and go through some of these next ones in the next 15 minutes here, because we have a 7 o'clock to go right into after this. We've talked about this in the past, but reaching out to the other taxing bodies to contribute to the cost of infrastructure repairs and replacements around their properties. We were successful with this with the library. They had the alley behind their property was in bad shape, and they said they would give us up to $5,000 towards the repair of that alley, since it was primarily their patrons that benefited. Now we have schools and all over the city that we have buses driving through and utilizing that, and heavy vehicles that contribute to the deterioration of those, but they don't pay anything. They're not taxing body, or they don't pay taxes, so they don't contribute towards the repair and upkeep of that infrastructure. They just get the benefit of it. So it might be worth just reaching out. We could figure out what the best way and who the best person to contact is for that, based on whatever relationships we might have between all of us. Furlough day plans for hourly and salaried employees to help cut budget. Again, that would probably come with a restructuring of hours of operations, or we'd have to figure out how and what that impacts. Unfortunately, over the years we've got a lot of savings through attrition, not replacing, so the workloads have not reduced. In many cases, they've actually increased, so trying to get that same amount of workload in a shorter period of time is going to be a challenge, but furlough days are an idea, as well as, unfortunately, always layoffs are an idea, but we have the same issue there, that we're at bare bones in every department, and that any reductions in staff is going to be a tipping point that's going to significantly affect the service within that department. So you'd have to figure out what we wouldn't be doing anymore, or what we'd be willing to accept as far as service response delays, etc. I don't know how we do this, but overtime is always a challenge in our budget. Trying to figure out a way to eliminate those overtime budgets. If there's ways we could get creative with trading off of days or something to have days that we know. I mean, we had this with debit days in the fire department. When we negotiated, it was very beneficial to us that with their new schedule, they had to work, is it 8? 8 debit days, basically 8 days in addition to their normal schedule to meet their hours annually. But those days are taken when somebody else is off on vacation, so that we wouldn't have overtime in that situation. So if we could find some way to structure that and really drill down on that overtime, I mean, we probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000 to $800,000 citywide in overtime annually, which is a big number. So getting creative on just saying that we don't call people in is the same as saying we're not going to provide services, same impact as layoff. But if there's some way we can shuffle that around, that'd be great. An idea is having residents being responsible for clearing alleys. Some municipalities do not plow alleys anymore. They plow main thoroughfares, or they don't plow alleys up until it gets to a certain situation. Now, that would help save on overtime, as well as potentially number of personnel and routes within that area. But it creates a whole nother plethora of potential problems. If your neighbor doesn't plow his section of the alley and you have to get to work, but you plowed yours, or how that all works, or your neighbor goes in at 7, but you go in at 6 and the alley's not plowed. It's an idea. I don't know how we implement that, but it's there. And then finally is any sort of fund-raising, revenue-raising opportunities we have, whether it's fundraisers, donations, or actual referendums. We've tried referendums before for the sales tax increase, revisiting that, revisiting any sort of tax referendum. I know it's a curse word around here, but that's the reality of the situation. It is an option that we have. Again, you know, it sounds ridiculous, but you know, GoFundMe accounts for specific city projects, or you know, any sort of fundraising opportunities that we have that we might need to be able to take advantage of. There are residents that have approached that said, hey, I wish, I know the city's only 14% of the tax bill, I wish I could give more there and less over here, and maybe they could give a little more of the goodness of their heart, but it's hard to hang a guaranteed budget fix on, but it is an option. So that's the list we have. That's the list to digest, and that will be digging into developing a little more over the next probably month. If you have any other ideas, please let me know. I would love to take some of these off the table, but until we have something to replace them, these are what we have. I would anticipate that our next meeting would probably be sometime in November. We have a township meeting on the 20th, I believe, at 6 or 6:15, so we wouldn't be able to have a meeting like this. But it also would give me time to go through some of the more of the details on these ideas.
Dave, will we have a list of these ideas that have been presented to us, delivered to us, so that we can write comments or additions to those and send those back to you?
Yeah, I mean, I could email each of you on this, and you obviously have the copy there, but but I can email you just the Word document too, if you have access to that, just to brainstorm, type in there. If you want to set up any times to meet with me and go through any specific idea, I'm happy to block out that time as well.
Okay. All right. Are there any other comments or questions for item number 6? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Holmes?
Aye.
Commissioner Fryerson?
Aye.
Commissioner McDowell?
Aye.
Mayor McKinney?
Aye. See you back in 20 minutes.